Hey, thanks for listening to this episode of a Vietnam podcast. Before we get started, I wanted to say thank you so much to our sponsor for season 14, somewhere that I've been going to for a long time, and that's Premier Dental, based in Tao Dien in Saigon. Now, wherever you're listening to this episode from, it might be anywhere in the world, or you might be anywhere in Vietnam, or you might be right here in Saigon. Premier Dental can look after you, whether you're coming from overseas, out of the city, or you live right here. I can't recommend them enough. I've used them several times. I've even had my wisdom teeth out, but they made it easy and simple and actually painless. It didn't hurt at all. So if you are looking for a dentist in Saigon, I would recommend checking out Premier Dental, not just because they're a sponsor of a Vietnam podcast, because I trust them and they are incredible and they really do a fantastic job. So check them out. If you're listening from overseas, just remember it's way cheaper to have a holiday in Vietnam and get your teeth done than it is probably in your home country. So come and have a holiday in Vietnam and get your teeth done at Premier Dental. So thank you so much to Premier Dental for sponsoring a Vietnam podcast, making this podcast possible, and being incredible dentists. So book your consultation today. Go to premierdental.vn and honestly, you will not regret it. All right, let's get started with this episode. Cheers. Your high school class is the basis for a very famous TV show, and you're actually the basis for one of those characters, correct?
My high school class of 2005 is the basis for it. And one of the characters in it is an Asian girl, where I was. At home, I was more Vietnamese, and then outside, I was more American, really. I think New York is great. It's very diverse, so I never felt specifically discriminated against as an Asian or as a Vietnamese. To this day, I think I seek out those on the edges of social circles and try to bring them in because I was once one of those.
Welcome to a Vietnam podcast with me, your host, Neil Mackay. I've now been hosting this podcast since 2019, and today is actually a really special day. Today is 6 years to the day since the very first episode of a Vietnam podcast.
Oh, wow. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. It was called a Saigon podcast back then. The full name was 7 Million Bikes, a Saigon podcast, and it is now simply a Vietnam podcast. We are in the top 5% of podcasts worldwide. We've interviewed over 200 people, hundreds of episodes, over 300 episodes. I now started 7 Million Bikes podcast, a podcast production agency. We've worked with over 70 podcasts, helped with millions of downloads, thousands of episodes, help podcasts get to the top of the charts, and absolutely none of this would have been possible without you listening to this, making it such a successful podcast. So thank you so much. But I do have to give a big special thank you to Lewis Wright, who composed the music for this podcast that still gets the most compliments today, way more than the actual podcast itself, but it's completely deserved. But more than that, Lewis taught me everything I know about microphones and audio, and everything in the beginning, and even still to this day helps me so much. So thank you so much to Lewis. But most of all, obviously, if you listen to this podcast, you know that I talk about her every episode. My wife, Adri Lopez Mackay, literally what you're listening to right now through all this equipment, through all this motivation, through all this energy would not be possible without her support and love and everything she's done over the years to make this podcast possible. So a massive thank you to her for making a Vietnam podcast and 7 Million Bikes podcast possible. So to get into today's episode, I'm always really excited, and I'm especially excited today. My guest today, she is Vietnamese American. She's the COO of Premier Dental, who are the sponsors of season 14 of Vietnam podcast, and an unbelievable dental surgery. They're actually my dentist. I've been going there for a couple of years. They're incredible at getting your wisdom teeth out. If you want to get your wisdom teeth out, painful, but they are amazing. So I would recommend going to Premier Dental. And she is a university lecturer and community builder. So most people might know my guest today through the numerous networking events and lunches that she does all over Saigon, which I have been to many times, and they are incredible. So go check them out. So today we're going to be talking about her life as an immigrant in New York City, a Vietnamese immigrant in New York City, and what it was like to grow up there. Then coming back to Vietnam and why she came back, and the linguistic and cultural challenges of operating a business in Vietnam. My guest today is Annie Vo. Annie, thank you so much for joining me on a Vietnam podcast. Now, I have something very interesting to ask you. I'm really excited to ask you about this. Now, your high school class is the basis for a very famous TV show And you're actually the basis for one of those characters, correct?
Correct. The inspiration, I guess.
Tell me about that.
The TV show that we're talking about is Gossip Girls, and my high school class of 2005, the Spence School in New York, is the basis for it. And one of the characters in it is an Asian girl who got into Yale early. And I think that's where the similarity ends, really, with me and that character in the show, though.
So what did you think when you found this out? Like, that's mental.
Yeah, I was blown away. Actually, I didn't know before I started watching the series, but there were so many similarities with the show and my classmates. Of course, some of the facts were, switched around a bit and embellished, but it was a little uncanny how it reflected, our school life and my friends.
I'm thinking now, if my life if there was a TV show based off of my life, what would it be? I want to hear from other people as well. Let me know in the comments, wherever it is. If there was a TV show based on your life, what would it be? You wouldn't know Still Game is like a Glaswegian comedy show based on two old guys. I feel like if that was maybe the closest to my life, maybe I'll show you that another time, Still Game. But so tell me then, you went to Yale, LA. How old were you when you went to Yale? Are you one of these child prodigies?
No, normal college age. I finished high school at a normal age, and I started Yale at 18.
And that's LA.
Early action, as in, instead of the normal regular admission cycle, you apply earlier on in the fall, and you get your admissions decision around December.
And the character was the exact same?
Exact same, yes, exactly.
So you've never figured out the connection between the show and your class?
No, so the show is based on a series of books, and we know who the author is, but I don't know the author's connection to my high school.
There's no obvious connection. It's not somebody's parent or a teacher or something like that?
I haven't investigated it, but no obvious connection that we know of.
All right, we got to look into that one. So New York City, I've lived in New York City. I actually lived there for 5 months, from 2007 to 2008. I lived in Brooklyn for a little bit. I lived in the Upper East Side. I worked in PJ Clark's. Do you know PJ Clark?
Yeah.
Famous burger joint, right? Yep. Yeah, it's famous because a lot of famous people went there. And one of the famous people at the time was Johnny Depp. Everyone talked about Johnny Depp. Came in, never met him, never saw him. And then I left, and then I went back for one night to have a burger. Because I think you weren't allowed to eat there if you worked there. But I'd finished. I went back to have a burger. And of course, they were like, oh, Johnny Depp was here last night. He was sitting right there. I was like, the day I leave or the week I leave, Johnny Depp comes in. So that was pretty cool. But it's funny. So New York is a special place. It's unique, right? I think it's... So I remember talking about doing this podcast for 6 years. First guest on here was J.K. Hobson, who was from New York. I remember asking him the question, at what age did you realize you were from New York? Because it is the center of the universe in a way. And if you're from New York, you think it's the center of the universe. So how did your family end up in New York?
Right. So it's an interesting story. We didn't come as refugees. My mom worked as a translator for international organizations, an interpreter rather, for international organizations in Vietnam. And through those connections, she met an NYU law professor who was so impressed with her English. It was a different world back then. And the professor offered her a scholarship to go study at NYU Law School. Now, the road from that offer to my mom coming to the U.S. and starting her law studies was a long one, but I followed her as a dependent. So we came on a plane. My mom, during her years at NYU Law School, initially couldn't take care of me, so that's why I lived in Chicago and LA initially with relatives, and then I moved to New York in 4th grade with her.
Wow. So you were 5 years old when you moved from Vietnam to America?
That's right, 5.5 years old.
Wow. So what are your memories? What year was that?
I think that was in 1992.
So what were your memories then of Vietnam before you left? I know nobody really remembers much before 5 years old, but what do you remember?
Oh, I have actually a lot of memories from my time in Vietnam, yeah. And my family was still poor, struggling a little bit. It was not too long after the war ended. I remember living in a multi-generational household with my maternal grandparents. I remember my grandfather being half paralyzed from going to sort of re-education camp a few years after, and my grandmother taking care of him. I remember my dad having a small dental chair on the first floor of our home on Ho Ho Hung Street.
Wow.
And I also remember my extended family, my great-grandmother on my maternal grandmother's side, visiting my great-grandparents and my grandmother's siblings. We had a lot of extended family. I remember how precious certain things were, like just a small piece of chocolate or a small piece of cheese or a little bit of ice cream. It was really precious. And even you didn't get a ton of presents for your birthday, just a few, but they were so sort of valuable.
Mm. And were you based in Saigon?
Yes, I was.
And whereabouts in Saigon?
Right in District 1. My
Wow.
family had a small house on Ho Hao Hung Street, which is a small street, near Cống Quỳnh, really near Bến Thành. And it was bought by the family sort of pooling money together.
What do you remember Saigon being like back then when you were younger?
Saigon, more broadly speaking, I think I was too small to remember that.
You only knew your world, right?
Yeah.
Like your house.
But it was a different world. It was a slower pace of life, more peaceful. A lot more bicycles. Cars were rare. I remember taking the sitlo to get to and fro within the city
Wow.
with my grandmother. Yeah, so I would be sitting on, someone's lap.
One of the things that I laugh about and it frustrates me is, have you seen the cyclos going about the city these days?
Yes.
Your face just sums it up. Why did you make that face?
Well, they're always carrying tourists, right? Yeah, and it's not a mode of transportation anymore.
No. What makes me laugh is they're basically driving through traffic.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like you see these tourists in the back of these cyclos and it's generally kind of older men and it's good. They got a job and they that's fine. You're giving them employment. There's nothing about that. But it's very inauthentic for one. Because when do you think cyclos stopped being used as a mode of transportation in Saigon?
Before I moved back here 7-8 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, I've been here nearly 10 years. I've never seen nobody. You don't get grab cyclo.
That's right.
You know what I mean? So I always just laugh when I see these tourists getting on the back of a cyclo, and they're normally in a tour group of about 10 in a row, and they'll be going down like Liswan or Nam Ki Khoi Nia, and it's just traffic, and I'm like, you're just breathing in pollution right now, and you're going by office buildings. It's not anything exciting. And have you seen these really old pictures? And maybe in Vietnam, I think I saw them in maybe Burma or an African country where expats, white people, used to get picked up on the back of people, and locals, and be carried literally on their backs.
Maybe I've seen a photo or two.
Yeah, I can't imagine if that was a tourist thing. Imagine if the tourists showed up and they're like, okay, can you carry me on your back? Like, we don't do that. So the cyclos, they always make me laugh. The one that is interesting, you're saying about ice cream and things like this. Do you remember having your first Coca-Cola?
I don't.
No. The reason I ask is we recently had the 50 years of reunification in Vietnam.
That's right.
And we saw this news report online, I think it was NBC or something like that in America. And this woman was interviewing an older Vietnamese man who'd been here during the war. And, it's obviously Western centric, it's from America. And, the end of the war, here it's very different. It's kind of not the end of the war. It's a reunification of the North and South. In America, it's very different. But anyway, in this report, she handed him a Coca-Cola. He took it. The report continued, but the voiceover said, this is his first Coca-Cola in 40 years.
Wow.
I was like, what? Well, couple of questions. Why? So he had Coca-Cola 10 years after the war, then 40 years after he never? Also, Coca-Cola is widely available in Vietnam, and it has been I've been here 10 years. When did Coke start becoming available in Vietnam?
Before I can remember, really.
Yeah, right. Like, it's been available forever. So it was just a very funny news report. I thought it was so condescending to be like, this man has not had a Coca-Cola in 40 years. And she hands him a Vietnamese can of Coca-Cola that's like, they probably sell that out the front of his shop.
Right.
So then you left Vietnam when you're 5 years old. What was it like then getting to America? Was it just crazy?
It was actually a bit of a lonely experience. I was leaving everything that I was familiar with here in Vietnam. Family, grandparents, relatives, language, culture. moving to a different country, different language, different family even. As I said, I was living with uncles and aunts in Chicago, then another different uncles and aunts in LA. So the readjustment was a little bit rough. But oddly enough, I only have sort of snippets of memories before I knew English. So like first day of school, my aunt just drops me off with my cousins and I don't know where to go. Being a little bewildered and not being able to even ask where the restroom is. So difficulties like that. But then it seemed like within a few weeks, I had sort of picked up the language.
That it always blows me away. I think that's incredible. I'm just remembering when I was 5 years old, I changed primary school and it was terrifying. I spoke the language. I could ask where the toilet is. I don't understand how you cope with that. I guess because you have to.
Yeah, I think it's sort of part of what makes me who I am today. Being able to reach out to people, adjust to new environments, and just be friendly. And to this day, I think I seek out those on the edges of social circles and try to bring them in because I was once one of those.
Wow. Well done. So at what age you moved to New York when you were ninth grade?
9 years
Sorry,
old.
9 years old, fourth grade, 9 years old. And you were in the Lower East Side before it was hip. And so what was that like back then? Because New York, I think now it's gentrified like everywhere else, right? But New York had a rough reputation back in the day. And what the nice areas would be like Fifth Avenue, the Upper East Side, the Upper West Side, things like this. But Lower East Side, what was that like?
Yeah, so we started off in Greenwich Village, which was already somewhat gentrified with NYU owning a lot of the buildings down there. But Lower East Side was rougher. I think I grew up more sheltered. I didn't have the typical New York upbringing, I think. I would sort of be based mostly at home and school and things like that. But you learn to be street smart. You learn to look purposeful when you're walking down the street.
Is that a New York thing?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And then you learn different self-defense tricks like holding your keys.
No way.
Yeah. And then,
It was that rough? It was that bad?
I mean, I think it was just a precaution. Nothing ever happened to me, thankfully.
Yeah.
But you learn to become street smart in New York for sure,
Wow.
just to make sure things don't happen.
So what would be the opposite, right? You're walking down the street and you don't look purposeful. You're kind of like daydreaming, like what, someone's going to just rob you or bash you? Or...
Well, first you might annoy New Yorkers walking behind you.
That's a real stereotype, right?
No, I mean, I think it's true. I there are lanes even in the sidewalks. Okay, stay in your lane so that someone can bypass you should they need to. But
I just wanted to give you a quick reminder about our sponsor of this season of a Vietnam podcast, Premier Dental. They really are experts at what they do. Their team is trained in Australia, France, and the US, and so they combine global expertise and high standards with really, truly personal care. You have to go there to see it. If you need any sort of dental work, whether you're in Vietnam or the rest of the world, make sure you go to the show notes or just go direct to premierdental.vn and book an appointment today. You can even book a chat with them if you're overseas to see how they can help you. All right, let's get back to the episode. I'm just thinking, what's that famous movie? It's like, I'm walking here.
yeah, I don't know which movie that is, but it is true from the New Yorker's perspective. Not looking purposeful, sort of ambling might get you noticed by the wrong folks, I think.
So then, being this young Vietnamese American, at what point did you say to yourself, I'm not Vietnamese, I'm Vietnamese American? Because you were born here, spoke Vietnamese growing up, then learned English. Was there a point in your head you were like, oh, I'm Vietnamese American?
No, I think I was too young when I came over to really reflect on that specifically. I always felt like I was both, and maybe it was more bifurcated between sort of where I was. At home, I was more Vietnamese, and then outside, I was more American, really. I think New York is great. It's very diverse, so I never felt specifically sort of discriminated against as an Asian or as a Vietnamese. It was just in the context of my school. It wasn't super diverse, especially socioeconomically, in addition to ethnically. But I think I've always, as far as I can remember, mostly viewed myself just as Vietnamese American. And back in Vietnam, I sort of didn't think in those terms.
What was it like then the first time you came back to Vietnam?
The first time I came back to Vietnam, that was in 10th grade. That was actually, I left when I was 5. I came back the year after, a year or two after, for one visit. But then after that, it was a period of 4 or 5 years that I didn't return to Vietnam because of my family financial situation. My dad had come to the U.S. for a few years, but he had to leave when I was in 5th grade to come back. His visa had expired, and he needed to be back here, professionally and otherwise. So I came back in 10th grade, and that was a momentous sort of occasion for myself personally, for my family, seeing my dad again after a few years. Of course, we had kept in touch, but it wasn't the same. And it was reconnecting with him and reconnecting with my birthplace, going back to Phan Rang to visit my paternal grandparents. Yeah, it was a sort of homecoming.
Was it a reverse culture shock or just a culture shock coming back after being in the States?
Not on that trip, because I stayed within the bosom of my family. But coming back 8 years ago, almost now, there was a reverse culture shock. Despite being relatively fluent conversationally in Vietnamese, or so I thought, and relatively connected to my family, my grandmother, and the Vietnamese community over there, and the Vietnamese Students Association in college, that did not prepare me for coming back here, especially sort of living and managing a business. So I had become very Americanized, or so I realized.
Well, perfect. So you came back 8 years ago and you had reverse culture shock. Explain a little bit about what was that reverse culture shock. Did you feel like you were coming back a completely different person to who you'd been before? You mentioned now being Americanized.
It had been such a long time. I mean, I thought I was Vietnamese American and half, but coming back, I felt more American than Vietnamese. And so one was the linguistic language barrier. I had never taken any courses in Vietnamese. I only had conversations at home in Vietnamese and with my grandmother in Vietnamese. So I really had to work on that and sort of jump in the deep end in terms of language and conversing and picking up the language, in terms of typing. So, I came back here and had to manage a family business. And I tried to type because a lot of my staff don't know English, especially the back office staff. And I would sort of type in Vietnamese, but without the accents. And I would sit there and wait and wonder, what is going on? Why is it taking 15, 20 minutes for my staff to answer a simple question? Later on, I think like 5, 6 months later, I discovered that they were trying to decipher what I was writing. So, that's sort of when I put the accents back
Without
in.
the diacritics, the accents, you're just writing gobbledygook, essentially, right?
Yeah, especially with my spelling mistakes as well.
I actually have a really important question. I've never known the answer to this, right? So you're talking about typing. So we know that each letter could have about 8 different diacritics, up, down, squiggles, hats, all of this. But the keyboards that all Vietnamese people use, from what I can see, the keyboards are QWERTY keyboards, right? They're all in Roman numerals?
Alphabet,
right? Roman alphabet, not numerals, Roman alphabet. How do you type in a Roman alphabet computer in Vietnamese?
So good question. You have to download the Vietnamese keyboard. The right. You can
Did not even know that, right? So you have to download that.
Right. I mean, but it still looks like a QWERTY, a normal English keyboard.
Yep.
Except that if you press on a letter a couple of times, it'll give you different options.
Right.
Yeah, and then if you start typing a word, it'll suggest that word as well in Vietnamese. So on the phone, on the keyboard on the phone, I think you tap on a letter multiple times to have the different accents and diacritics show up, and then you can Yeah,
So we have, I can sound like an idiot here. We have 26 letters in the alphabet, right?
I think so.
Right, okay. Got that one right. I was a bit unclear there. 26 letters in the alphabet, but each vowel, I guess, A, E, I, O, U, can have the hats and different diacritics. You don't have diacritics on consonants, right?
No, you don't have. So each of those letters, if it has a squiggly line on the end, like the O or the U, it becomes an or a O, an O. Those are considered different letters.
Yeah, so my point is we have 26 letters in the Roman alphabet, but then you suddenly add all these diacritics, then it extends it to how many, like a QWERTY keyboard goes from 26 letters to 50, 60?
No, it's still the normal QWERTY keyboard.
But I mean, conceptually.
Yes.
Like
So
you have to learn now that each key has 6 different meanings, or not each key, but some keys have 6 different meanings. So if you want to write, like Nam is the one I always use the example of, like Nam has 7 different meanings, like man, 5 years.
right.
So if you want to write man, which is Nam, backward, you need to know exactly what keys to use.
That's right.
So you have to relearn the keyboard, and it's way harder.
It's easier than you think. Just
Is it
give it a
really?
try, and then you get the knack of it. Yeah, it's like learning to type.
But you have to learn to type in a different language, essentially.
That's right.
What do people in Thailand do? Because they have a completely different script.
I have
What
no
keyboard
idea.
do they use? And we need to figure that one out because I just went to Thailand. So you came back to Vietnam 8 years ago. What made you then leave America and come back to Vietnam?
So initially, Vietnam was supposed to be a sort of a long layover on my family's way to Australia, because my husband is Vietnamese Australian, born and raised, and we got married, and I had kidnapped him and brought him to New York, and we had been there together for 4 years.
Where did you meet?
Met in Australia on summer vacation.
Wow.
I was
Beautiful.
on summer vacation. Yes,
Oh,
beautiful
it's
memories.
like Grease. Summer loving. Do you know that movie? Yeah, okay. Just to make sure that you got my reference there. No, that's beautiful. You met on holiday. Do you think, I'm watching that show Love is Blind. Do you watch Love is Blind? It's
I
awful.
have.
It's
I
terrible,
have.
terrible
I have
film.
to admit.
But what I've noticed, right, even when they can't see each other, it kind of people are attracted to, and I don't mean this to be racist, their own race. People, and even in Vietnamese people like you and your husband meet each other on the other side of the world. Black people meet black people. Scottish people meet Scottish people. We seem to, even if we put this love is blind, where it's meant to be blind, we still end up attracting to like meets like, I guess, in a way. Have you noticed that within the Vietnamese diaspora around the world?
That's a big question. I have not done a sociological study, but in general, I think that a lot of Vietnamese people do maybe tend to end up together, or Asians in general. I don't want to make any, generalizations, really. I can't speak to it. But for me personally, I actually thought I would end up with someone not Vietnamese, or perhaps even not Asian, because of just where I was and the environment in which I was, and also being a Christian, not Catholic, Tin Lành. There were very few Vietnamese young adults my age who were of the same faith, kind of similarly situated where I was growing up and where I was going to school. So that's why I always thought I would end up with, a non-Vietnamese American.
And how did your family feel then when you met a Vietnamese Australian? Was it, oh, he's Australian? Oh, no, but they're happy he's Vietnamese?
Yes, I think at the end of the day, they were happy, especially my dad.
Right.
Maybe he was more, yes, especially my dad. Because I think if I had not, he would have lost his connection with my family and especially with my kids. And so marrying a Vietnamese who was equally, or perhaps more so, connected to the Vietnamese language and values as I was extremely beneficial in raising our kids with the same values.
And I was going to say, so culturally, do you think it's more beneficial? But I guess you just answered that question. So you kidnapped him to America. What did he think of America as an Australian?
I think he appreciated, New York for what it offered, but I think he prefers the pace and sort of way of life in Australia more.
It's very different.
Very, very different.
And then how did you convince him then to move to Vietnam, which is even more different?
Well, I think that was a joint decision, really, fully a joint decision. I was pregnant with our second daughter, and my parents were here, and so I just wanted maybe them to be around for the birth of our second child, and their assistance also after, at least my mom's.
No offense, Dad.
But then there was also, remember, the period of separation I had with my dad when I was younger, which was not insubstantial. And so I wanted a significant period of time with him, close to him as well. But we thought it would be maybe a year and a half. And then we would move to Australia, where my husband was based. But that extended to 8 for a lot of reasons. I mean, life here was just turned out to be so great.
I love it because we've had this conversation just recently. Comes up a lot. I don't know anybody who moved here intentionally for the long term, even yourself as Vietnamese. It's just,
That's right.
We're the same. We came here for 6 weeks. 9 years later, we're still here. You came here for a year. And then, so what is it about Saigon and about Vietnam that just draws people here and we just love it and we stay and we're like, yeah, we're not leaving?
So I've got, there are the reasons that are generally applicable, and then there are the reasons that, for me personally, makes Vietnam more very meaningful. For me personally, it was my family, my relatives, and the family business. So my husband is a dentist, Vietnamese Australian dentist, and he joined the practice as a dentist, and my dad gradually handed over the reins to him and myself together as a unit to manage the business as my dad goes into retirement. And so that's been super rewarding. Managing a dental clinic business, the employees, the impact that we have on the culture, and the care that we give the patients, kind of expanding on my dad, continuing my dad's legacy and expanding on it and making it sort of more international. Professionally, it's been really rewarding, especially for my husband. Having my kids grow up with close to my parents, really great, especially since for periods of my life, when I was younger, I grew up far away from them. So allowing my kids to have that relationship with their grandparents and how much my parents love them is amazing. I mean, they do spoil them a bit.
I think all grandparents, that's the job of a grandparent, is to spoil their grandkids, right?
Yeah, my mom was a bit strict, strict when I was growing up, right?
Not the grandkids.
Yeah, and the kids would maybe be throwing a bit of a temper tantrum, and my mom would be like, "Oh, that's so cute." And I was like, "Who is this person?" All right. So having that relationship is great, and then also allowing my kids to grow up as bilingual kids. If they had grown up in the U.S. or Australia, I think their Vietnamese would be at a very, very basic level, if anything at all. So that's been important for us. And then overall, Vietnam is just so vibrant and dynamic. It's growing. I think the middle class is growing. The business opportunities are also here if you have the requisite experience and credentials and skills and do the hard work, of course. I think the opportunities are there and the threshold barriers are lower as well. I've had opportunities to do things here that I wouldn't have had to do elsewhere. One concrete example is my teaching position, lecturing as a lecturer at Kaiser University, Vietnam. They approached me just because I had a JD from the U.S. And in order to teach a topic at Kaiser University, Vietnam International Center, you have to have a master's or above in the area that you're teaching. So I'm teaching business law to college students, Vietnamese college students, but at a U.S.-based institution, so in English. They approached me, and I was not looking to teach. I didn't think I would teach. I hadn't even really thought about it, but it's such a great... when the opportunity came my way, I thought about it, and I thought, what a great way to share some of my experience with Vietnamese students here. And so that opened a door for me that I don't think would have ever happened in the U.S.
Amazing. So your husband is a dentist as well, and your dad is a dentist?
Correct.
So would you agree then that women marry their dad?
It happened to be the case for me, perhaps. But to be fair, I did not know he was a dentist when I first met him.
Really?
Yes, my uncle told him he was a bác sĩ, in Vietnam, you use that term for doctors, medical professionals, doctors and dentists. So I was like, okay, bác sĩ, you know.
Well, that ticks a box for, let's be honest, your dad is like, your family's probably like, okay, he's a doctor, like number one.
Yeah, but I didn't know he was a dentist, so I wasn't sort of looking to marry, you know, a dentist as well. But, you know, as fate would have it.
I think it's not just, it's a complete anecdotal story. I think it's funny though. It does seem to happen a lot. I think I see with myself and Adri's dad, I can see a lot of similarities. And I like it. I'm like, oh, I want to be like, oh, dad's fucking awesome. So I think it's something that it's probably completely anecdotal. I haven't done a sociological study on it either. But I just think it's funny. It's interesting that I think people, again, we find like attracts like almost. But then there's also that other thing that opposites attract as well. Thank you so much. This has been incredible talking to you and really, really enjoyed it. Finally, I get to put you on the spot because you do all these amazing events and networking events. You really do help bring people together in Saigon. So it's amazing. Bringing the Vietnamese community together as well. You do a lunch every Tuesday.
That's right.
The Vietnamese overseas lunch, which I went to recently. I was the token white guy. Annie sent me a message on Facebook. She's like, you going to come to the event? I was like, well, I'm not Vietnamese and I'm not overseas Vietnamese either. But she's like, please come along. So I call myself the token white guy. But I know it was amazing. And your networking events on Thursday are brilliant as well. I actually managed to get clients for my business through that as well. So it's really, really incredible. Premier Dental is, honestly, it is amazing. I'm not just saying this because I have been there. I've been going for years. You've reminded me I need to go and get my teeth cleaned soon, actually, as well. But thank you so much. You are also the sponsor of season 14 of a Vietnam podcast. So we really appreciate that as well. So make sure you go check out Premier Dental. Whether you're overseas thinking of coming to Vietnam for dental tourism, I can completely vouch for them. They are incredible. And if you live in Vietnam, you're looking for a dentist. If you're living in Vietnam and you're looking for a dentist, then go check out Premier Dental as well.
Thank you, Neil.
You are very welcome. Annie, thank you for joining me on a Vietnam podcast. Thank you for listening on this special episode, 6 years today since the very first episode of a Vietnam podcast, recorded in my bedroom on a tiny little microphone, one piece of equipment. Now you can't even see, but we have equipment all around us. Hopefully you can hear the difference as well. So don't forget, please share this episode with somebody else who is passionate about Vietnam, whether they live here or not. Rate, review, subscribe, follow, all of that stuff. Remember, we are on YouTube now, so if you are watching on YouTube, thank you so much. Or if you want to see what me and Annie look like and you're listening, then go to YouTube and go check it out. So thank you so much for listening to this episode of a Vietnam podcast, and I hope you listen to many, many more in the future. Annie, thank you so, so much.
Thank you, Neil. I'm honored.
You are welcome. Cheers. Thanks for listening to this episode of a Vietnam podcast. If today's episode made you smile, then make sure your smile is ready to shine with Premier Dental. How good a cheesy segue was that to our sponsor, Premier Dental. Thank you so much, Premier Dental, and you for listening. Check them out. They offer professional, ethical, world-class care right here in Saigon. You can find out more at premierdental.vn.